Zoom recording. Here we go. Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for your interest in, well, just first of all, our teens and getting to know them better and just learning ways to connect with them. My plan is for this to be about 6 classes. I'm going to adjust the schedule because we were going to be away one Thursday, and I don't think we are anymore. So I'll send out a new schedule. I don't know if you saw what I sent out earlier for email with the topics and stuff, but if you're one who likes to read the um, the syllabus ahead of time, you might be frustrated with me because I've already changed the order in which I'm going to present all this. I was trying to think through, for a class like this where we're trying to learn more about teenagers and how to really be with them, where do you start? I mean, do we start with Gen Z? Do we start with some practical, what should we do if we're interacting with teenagers? What I decided to do instead is look at a topic of really, I think, where the disconnect lies. And, some of this is just age-old generation gap. I, as I am getting older, which I'm really not that old, but when you're a teenager, 29 going on 30 can seem kind of old. But I have definitely transitioned into the time where I recognize that I'm not young anymore. The things that I knew that were cool are not cool anymore, and all of that stuff. And so I wanted us just to kind of start by thinking about where is the disconnect? What are we trying to accomplish with young people, and where youth ministry fits in with that? So that's kind of where I want to go tonight. I want to first read two things. One is scripture, Mark 9:36, and then I want to read a quote from a book. And in a minute or later on, I'll talk more about some resources. If you're really interested, if you're a big time reader, there might be a book or two you'd be interested in. So Mark 9:36, this is Jesus talking. He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." So that's Jesus talking to his disciples and the crowd about children. And it's interesting that he doesn't say whoever teaches these children correctly. You know, he says whoever welcomes them. And I of course, the teaching part is important, and we'll talk more about that. But Jesus, he starts with this idea of welcoming children, making them feel like they belong. All right, hopefully that won't be an issue anymore. So he reminds us that when we welcome young people, we're really welcoming Jesus. So to me, that says that what we're trying to accomplish is an important thing. Let me also read just a quote from a book to kind of again speak to this disconnect. This book is called, it's backwards probably, Contemplative Youth Ministry. I'll share a list of all of these books. Contemplative Youth Ministry by Mark Yaconelli. That's Yaconelli. Again, I'll send this all out, but probably my favorite youth ministry book. But he says this: "We do not know how to be with our kids. We know how to entertain them, market to them, test them, and statistically measure them, but we have forgotten how to be with them. As a result, today's youth have become more and more isolated, alienated, and left to fend for themselves." And I'll just stop there. So some of this disconnect, I think, is just that age-old generation to generation thing. Some of it, though, I think is new things. Our world is very different than it was 50 years ago. Our world is very different than it was in the time that the Bible was written. And we need to recognize those changes so that we can bridge that gap, that disconnect. So that's kind of where we're headed. Just real fast, I think we pretty much have this covered, but some Zoom logistics, you guys are probably for the most part pros at this by now, but if you have a dog barking, or a child screaming or something in the background, go ahead and just mute yourself. Rebecca might mute you for us just for that sake, but hopefully you all know how to do that. Should be the bottom left corner. There's a little microphone button. That's pretty much it. I think you guys all know that. So I want to start just with a few questions. Don't feel like you have to answer any or all of them. But I'd like to just kind of hear first off why you wanted to do this class. What attracted you to the idea of either doing this class or being a part of that mentoring thing that we're hoping to kick off?
Well, we have grandchildren that we rarely see. And so I think that makes it even more difficult to have any kind of interchange with them. And for that was one of the reasons I wanted to.
Yeah. You have people in your life that are young people. I'm sure
Right.
all of us do. What else? What else brought you to this class?
I don't know if there's a particular order that you want us to go in.
Nope.
But the reason I wanted to take this class is, number one, our teens in the church. And number two, my son's going to be a teenager one day, and things are going to be different when it comes to, teaching the gospel to him right now is a little bit different because he's a child. But you have to change your approach when it comes to, teenagers and adolescents. And also I'm studying adolescent psychology in my college right now. And I'm also mentoring a young lady who's in her 20s, kind of still in the same mind frame as a teenager as well. So those are all some really good reasons why I wanted to take this class.
Yeah, those are good reasons. I think we could learn a lot from your perspective. Anyone else?
Yeah, have a rapport with the kids. So, we can talk on the same level. They understand, and I understand what they're saying. And I realize that we're in different worlds. And I like to bridge that world so I can, really understand what's going through their minds and how they respond and why do they respond and whether they do. And is there any way that I can help and encourage them to continue to be followers and just work together as a family?
Good. Stan, were you going to say something?
I was just thinking maybe on that disconnect issue. I don't want to become a grumpy old grandpa or a Scrooge. I think what you're saying, Kyle, enter the kids' world rather than them coming into ours, to listen to them rather than belittling for what they are doing.
That's good. We're going to talk about some of that.
Oh, good.
Nelda, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like I can do fine with littler kids, and I'm comfortable with young people college age, but when they're teenagers, I just want to run away. They intimidate me, and I don't know why. But I know what you say is true, that it's really important for them to have relationships aside from their parents, and especially in the church. So, I've been wondering what kind of ministry God might be calling me to now. And so your class popped up and it suddenly hit me, well, I should try this at least to see.
Corey?
When I was growing up in the youth group, we had the overcomers. We had all kinds of, your grandpa was the youth minister and Sean Jones was the minister. And I loved how many opportunities we had to get together and to do the overcomers, you know, to travel around together and put on skits to encourage people just on the littlest things, you know, about God and Jesus. And Kyle, yourself, you've said that as young kids, we all have mentors. It's nice when somebody that's older grabs onto you and they actually intimately want to have a relationship with you. You know, they want to really know how you're doing, not just, oh, Sunday morning, good morning, how are you? It's they want to know how your week was, and they want to know if it went bad and what went bad. And when I went away to college and then came back, it's nice to still have those relationships with people, because those are relationships you build for life. And you know, if the kids today don't have any of that with the older generation, there's nothing that's going to draw them back.
Mhm.
So I think it's so important for us to make those relationships.
Cool. Yeah, you will probably hear me say more than once that statistics show that when young people have more than one adult in their life in a mentoring role, they are a lot more likely to develop a faith of their own that's successful through, you know, their emerging adulthood. Cool. I'm just going to keep things going because we have a lot to cover. So, you know, Corey brought up something that's, I think, really important. You know, we could think of important factors in our own faith development. I was kind of going to ask this as a question, but, you know, we could think of just like things like going to church, growing up in a Christian family, having time of fellowship, you know, participating in a Christian culture or something like that. But I think one thing that we often don't think about is how important those other relationships are, those other Christian adult relationships that we form. A lot of these young people are going to form Christian relationships with their peers. They're going to go to college, and many of them will not continue in the faith. And that's tough. But when they can come back and they can see that there are other people who they've had a relationship with that are still walking, it makes it a little easier to keep with it and to make it their own. So that's really what this whole class is about, is bringing awareness to that and equipping us to be good adults for teenagers. Something I want you to think about, this is kind of maybe some homework, is to think about, and I'll have other homework for you at the end, but think about who were the people outside your family who helped you grow. Well, that'll be our intro question next time. Who were the people outside of your family who helped you grow in your faith? So in other words, who were your Christian mentors? If you had any, which I would guess that you probably had at least one. Okay, last little intro question. How or why do you feel disconnected from today's youth? What are some reasons why you feel potentially disconnected from today's youth? Oh, Janine, you're
I'll,
muted.
I'll say something really quick.
Sure.
I think the way kids are today with phones and electronics and media and games, Like there are people who are professional gamers, which just blows my mind that people can get paid to play games. But
Mhm.
you know, 50 years ago, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, like people, what they did is they worked, but they worked with their hands. And it's so hard, even with my kids today, the age of 3 up to the age of 12, to get them to go outside and do manual labor. They think they're entitled. Why do I have to do work? You know, why can't I just sit around all during spring break and play video games all day? And I don't really understand that because that's not the way that I was raised as a kid. And but that's, I think kids today think they're entitled to things, and when their friends have things, they think they need to have those too. And so just the generation of how they're growing up right now is totally different uh, than the older generation thinks. And so that's hard to deal with.
Mhm. We'll speak more to that next week, but that's definitely there. And I would ask the rhetorical question, what generation did not believe that the next generation was entitled? You know what I mean? I think that's part of getting old also, Corey. But I think you have a point. I do think that there's something real there. What else? Other reasons you feel disconnected? Janine, you were going to say something.
I'm just going to say, I can barely, I know the names of some of our teams, but I don't even know the names of all of them. I mean, I am totally disconnected.
Names. Even knowing their names or not knowing their names is a huge factor.
Uh,
Yeah. My first youth ministry class at Harding, that's the only thing we did the entire class period was memorize every single person's name to make that point. Anything else?
I always have this feeling that they don't want an older person talking to them, that it's just not cool. And, I don't speak the same culture anymore. And so therefore I've never been one to like put myself forward where I'm not sure I'm wanted. And so that's, I think, why I feel intimidated. And like Corey mentioned, so often they're in their phones and things, and that's very off-putting. And I understand that for some people, that's kind of a shield. But anyway,
Yeah.
I just don't know how to or feel comfortable even trying.
Mm-hmm. Stan?
And I kind of struggle with, like finding relatable topics to begin talking with the teen, like obviously you can share the gospel with them, but there's a special way that you have to do it, and making that connection, like that initial connection in talking to them. That's where I find the difficulty and the disconnect.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of, like, you ever seen a show where someone goes on a blind date and they're so nervous they write down conversation topics, to be prepared in case they don't know what to say. Because yeah, I mean, I feel the same way too sometimes, and I'm a youth minister. So Stan, you were going to say something?
yeah, I can kind of see a divide between the youth and the other congregation together. There's not a unifying thing. And I think part of this is like I would just remember when we went to to see my mom and dad, we went to see grandpa and grandma, and we kids would go out and play because all the adults sat in the room arguing over everything. And I think that's somewhat what I see maybe the youth seeing in adults. Sit around and argue over everything and anything. And I think the youth don't need to see that. They need to see a love type thing. I don't know if I said that right.
No, I think so. I mean, I think sometimes we get the idea that our young people are uninterested and disengaged, but they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. They are a lot more perceptive. They know our issues, and they have questions. And if we're not ready to provide space for them, they're not going to stick around. So it's a good insight. So I want to speak to some more things regarding this disconnect. I've kind of heard some themes pop up from what you guys have been sharing in this book, and there's lots of books that talk about the disconnect, but one thing that Mark talks about is this idea of anxiety. I think there's a lot, the anxiety that we have as adults towards teens and vice versa. I think there's several things that kind of create this disconnect. Just the unknown, them not knowing older generations and us not knowing their new culture. I don't know if you've ever seen this on Facebook. This drives me nuts. But when people post like a picture of a phone booth or something, and they're like, I bet you don't know what this was used for back in 1852. And it's like, what's the point of that? To make young people feel stupid for not knowing what a VCR is or something like that? I hate those. But just that unknown. I think change creates disconnect. I think misconceptions create disconnect. But I mostly want to speak to this idea of anxiety because I think that really goes to the core. And this is kind of how I define anxiety, or I think Mark speaks about it. It's the inability to be present. It's the inability to be present and being in a state of agitation in which we lose our capacity to empathize, love, and respond to the needs of others. I'll kind of read that again. Anxiety, this concept of anxiety is the inability to be present, the state of agitation in which we lose our capacity to empathize, love, and respond to the needs of others. Now, this can be true of anything, other cultures, other religions, but we're thinking mostly about generations. So I want to talk about two things kind of briefly, and I'm going to kind of fire hose some information here. So if I'm going too fast or if you have a question, just holler. That's what this is for. So I want to talk first about adult anxiety. So this is the idea that teens make adults feel anxious. So this is all speaking to that disconnect. Teens make adults feel anxious. Teens are unfamiliar. Their culture moves faster than ours. They're hard to understand, like the way they communicate. I don't know if anyone knows what the word yeet means, but that's something the kids are saying these days. And they can seem foreign. So the unfamiliar causes anxiety. Teens have big swings. And what I mean by that is they're fidgety, they have high highs, and they have low lows. And some of that is just because their bodies and minds are still growing and they got chemicals racing through their bodies. And even though that happened to us, it's weird to look back and be like, oh yeah, I used to be like that. So teens have big swings, creates anxiety for adults. Teens are green. And what that basically means is that they make adults feel old. And they are new, like a green thumb, They're asking obvious and blunt questions. Sometimes we don't like it when teens ask questions. We just want them to accept it and move on because that's just how it is, That question or that answer does not work, at least not anymore.
It never did.
Yeah, it never really worked.
Never
We
worked
just
for me.
put up with it, right? So another one, teens are unpredictable. Their choices seem bizarre, and sometimes they are. Um, they shock us with some of the choices that they make. And again, I think that mostly comes down to growing minds and developing bodies. We forget that they're going through puberty and that they haven't really fully developed until even 25. I want to read another quick quote talking about this adult anxiety thing. Let me see here. Page 33. Oh, yeah. So this is kind of adults responding to teens. Adults want teens to hurry up and get their identities fixed and grounded. Adults want youth to have a roadmap for a secure and reasonable future, and we get rattled when they notice that most youth aren't carrying one. So something that causes adult anxiety is that we just want them to be adults already. Figure it out. Figure out your faith and your career choices. Like, just please get to that next stage so that we can understand you and communicate better. But they're not there yet, and we can't just expect them to get there on their own. That's crazy. Another thing, there's a growing gap between adults and teens. And this is where I think history is newer. It's not just repeating itself. We have youth programs now. For the last 50, 70 years, that's a newer development in our societies. It used to be you're a kid until you're like 15 or 13, and now you're an adult and you better get a job. But now we have like youth programs. Technology has completely changed everything. There is a bigger gap. That's why Corey's daughter Afton can pick up an iPad and do more with that iPad as how old is she? 6, 5?
6.
6-year-old can do more with an iPad than any of us. That's insane. Adults get scared. This is a big one. Adults get scared when they see teens reflecting their former selves, our former selves. We're often stirring up forgotten dreams and evoking unmet longings. Sometimes we look at teens and we think, man, I'm not young anymore. I never got to play baseball on the varsity team. They just stir up old stuff. And then the less contact adults have with teens, the more mysterious they appear and the more anxiety is created. So the less you know, the more mysterious and anxiety causing they are. That's how, as Stan was kind of speaking to, that's how adults become those old farts who are like, get off my lawn. They just they have no idea who these kids are and anything about them. So the less contact that we have with teens, the less we know about them, the more mysterious they appear and the more anxiety is created. So let's look at the other side of the coin, because that hurts. That's probably a little too close to home for us, right? So teen angst. Adults make teens feel anxious. It goes both ways. So you're not alone. This is just speaking in generalities, but if we were to ask, lots of people have done studies on stuff like this. If we were to ask young people their impressions on adulthood, just out of curiosity, what do you think young people would say? What would a teenager say is their impressions on what it's like to be an adult?
Boring, responsibility, no fun.
Yep, that's part of it. Adults worry, Adults have big responsibilities and adults do not have fun.
Uh,
Now, that's not always true, of course, but that's their perspective. Anything else?
Judgmental. Uh,
Yeah.
Kelsey says grumpy,
Mm-hmm.
and I say, I forgot because I'm old.
We'll come back to you if you remember.
Forgetful.
So here are some that I wrote down. Adults have to make tough choices. That's just not fun. Adults don't have friends. That's a big one. If you think about it, I don't know about you, but I went through a period where I looked around and Rebecca and I were like, man, where did all of our friends go? They all moved away. When we first got to Newburgh, there were not many people our age. So these kids are looking at their parents. All they do is go to work and then come home and hang out with them. They don't have any friends. Adults are stressed out. They're always working. They have no passions. That's their perspective. So that idea of growing into a person like that scares them and gives them anxiety.
I was gonna say kids think that adults don't know where they are. I mean, you just don't know. You can't relate because you don't know where I am or who I am or where I am today.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side, teens recognize that adults have a sense of freedom in that they don't have an authority figure over them, which would be a parent. Now, the ironic thing is, as adults, I think we would say there's lots of things that govern our lives, but they haven't experienced that. One quick example, I think about like voting. Now, that's something that's changing in younger generations, but I'm a millennial, so I'm outside the teenage bubble. But a lot of millennials, at least early on, they didn't vote because who cares? It doesn't affect me, you know. But as an older person, older people vote because it affects them. I don't want my taxes to go up. Well, I wasn't paying taxes, so who cares, Teens have anxiety about the future. And this is one that is maybe not necessarily worse than before, but there's a growing awareness because of the internet and because of social media. This one has exploded. When teens think about the future, they think about there's no chance for a positive future or prosperity, or at least very little chance. The idea of the American dream for younger people is almost laughable. That if I just work hard enough, that I can become wealthy. Kids do not think that way anymore. Yeah, Nilda.
Some of us are old enough to remember growing up during the Cold War when there was a real threat of atomic war. And so maybe that's in some way we can relate because my generation felt like there's no future. We're all going to die in a mushroom cloud.
Yeah, exactly. So seeing those connections, because they know that it wasn't easy for you guys either. But imagine living through, 60s, 70s, 80s, Cold War time with Facebook. Imagine everyone talking about it all the time, and you can see it every day, and you have endless opinions about it. Now, you probably saw it on TV and read it in the newspaper, but imagine seeing that almost every minute of your day. That's a huge difference.
No wonder suicide gets so high.
Yep, and we'll talk about that later. Not today, but we'll talk about that. So teens look at the future. They think about stuff like climate change, race and religious turmoil, poverty gap, employment challenges, cost of college has skyrocketed. And again, the biggest difference is not that these things are new, it's that the awareness of these things has exploded because of the internet, because of social media. Okay, something else. Adults make teens feel anxious. Impressions on how adults view teens. So this is what they think about what you think about them. That they are incapable, unable to think deeply, they make terrible choices, unable to filter their reality, they have their heads in the clouds, they're unprepared and unreliable. Now, you probably don't have all of those opinions, but that's what they think that you think about them. So where does youth ministry fit in with this? When we think about the church's involvement in creating this anxiety, and some youth ministries contribute to it a lot. Some maybe are more aware of their effect in this respect, but here are some things that I've seen. I think youth have this idea in the church that they're to be seen and not heard. One of the things that I've heard several times at Newburgh from people, and I want you to listen to this and tell me, thinking this way, tell me why you think this might not be the best idea. So something I've heard at least a dozen times is, man, it would be so cool if the youth all sat on the front row like they used to do so we could see them all there. And, man, that would just be so encouraging. Someone tell me why that might actually not be a very good idea. Sorry, what'd you say, Lorinda? Oh, we can't hear you for some reason. Can you guys hear her? Might be your mic input or something.
Oh,
Any other thoughts while she's figuring that out?
For one thing,
Janine?
they don't want to be on display, I think.
Yeah.
And to think that everybody's looking at them is
Yes.
intimidating.
Yep. One, because it's intimidating, and two, because they're not our trophies. Anyone else?
I just thinking of that scripture where you bring in the rich people and have them sit forward because they're the ones giving all. So you're segregating a certain group. I don't know if that's an example there or not, but it's like, nah, they're already together all the time. We need to, what do you think, Kyle, interdisperse throughout the congregation?
Yeah, and that's been a good critique on youth ministries in the past, that they've kind of created a second church and they haven't integrated. And, that's a tough one. It's hard to balance that. But I think that's, sometimes we as adults almost want that. Like, yeah, let them have their fun corner. So yeah, this idea of, they should be seen and not heard. Like we want to have a big, vibrant youth program, but we don't really want them, sharing their opinions or asking tough questions or challenging our doctrine. We don't want that. So youth ministry as a form of babysitting. Once you're an adult, then you will matter. This is another way I think we sometimes contribute to that as a church. When you're an adult, then your opinion matters more. Another way we kind of contribute, we want you to learn our ways and not deviate or don't think or create anything new. Another one, another example is the age-old, why do we sing the new devotional songs? Just as I am is just enough for me, and it's kind of like this idea that once we hit 1960, our creativity reached its max And after that, it's like, wow, I don't think we need anything else. So all these young people who have these great ideas and have written great songs or produced amazing art or have become great thinkers and maybe want to introduce something new to the history of Christianity, no thanks. We're good enough. You know, I learned from this 80-year-old guy who's dead now, and he taught me everything I need to know. So we don't need to sing your songs. You can sing them at camp, but don't bring them here, right? Learn our ways, but don't deviate and don't create anything new, please. Don't ask tough questions.
Mhm.
Just trust us. We kind of talked about that already. Now, I think when we're being our best selves, we can see that those things are kind of ridiculous. When we're being our best selves and we're aware, we're conscious of the importance of, teens contributing and being a part of things, we're not going to function that way. But unfortunately, we kind of create these patterns of how we act, and we normally default to this kind of way of thinking. Here's another one we could do that I've heard. Tell me, so again, this is not like a bad thing to say, but tell me the undertones of why this is maybe not the best idea, or why we need to be careful about how we go about this. So another thing I've heard multiple times is, man, it would be so great if we could get some of the young men up there to lead singing or to do a prayer. I just wish we could see them doing that more often. Now, is that a bad thing? I think right off the bat, we can say, of course not. Of course, we want to include our young people in our corporate worship. But do you have any ideas about why we need to be careful about saying things like that or thinking that way? It'd be so great if we could just see some young people up there leading singing. What do you think? Any thoughts about why we need to be careful thinking that way? Yeah, Janine.
Well, I think we set them up sometimes for criticism that they don't need to hear.
Yeah. Criticism could be one. The other thing is, again, with the best of intentions, some people have when they say that, we don't prepare them. We don't, or we just expect someone else to do it. Like, I mean, I like to lead singing, but that doesn't mean I want to teach these kids how to lead singing, or that someone else couldn't do it, and why do we want to see that? Again, do we want to just convince ourselves that we have a successful youth ministry, that these kids are going to be okay if they can just learn to lead worship or say a prayer in front of other people? Some people, like a lot of, at least the young men that have been, or, young fellows in my youth group over the years would be terrified to do that. I've definitely had some young women who would jump at the chance, but again, that's another topic for another time. Nelda, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I feel a little bit confused because we talked earlier about how they are to be seen and not heard. They feel that. And so it's like, it feels like you can't win if you,
Yeah, fair enough.
You know what I mean? And so I'm like, what do we do?
Yeah, we do. I mean, obviously, we want to find good ways to include them. I think
Yeah.
that's where those two extremes of, seen and not heard, or heard but not supported and not mentored, and so we got to find the balance between those. Because again, I am in full support of getting young people involved in our corporate worship. That's a good thing to see. And we've done that over the years in different ways. But do we really come alongside them? What's our motives? And I want to talk about that. We'll probably go over a little bit if that's okay with everyone. If you have to duck out, go for it.
Kyle, can I say something really quick about
Yeah,
that?
go for it.
for me, it's an encouragement to see younger people being involved, just because it's nice to know that they want. I mean, hearing a little child's prayer, it may be a little goofy, might not be much to it, but it's so amazing to hear, what's actually on their heart and what they're saying to Jesus. And so for me, I love to see little children or young boys get involved in reading scripture, saying prayers, passing communion. But it also, and being the deacon of, helping the worship, getting all the men together for worship, I think that people feel more involved and connected when they have a part to play. They have something to do to use their talents for the worship, and I think that helps. So that's another part of it too. If you know that you're going to have something to do, you're needed, and you feel needed rather than just showing up and, okay, I was there and now I'm gone. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember as a young man growing up, I was asked to help pass those trays in the back, probably I think with you and with Jim. And that was a good way of slowly introducing me to that. And eventually I think I helped with sound booth. And I can remember the first Sunday that I stood up front, because we used to do that, right? The guys would stand up front with the trays, and I was terrified. And that's why I remember it, because I was afraid that I would screw it up and drop the tray of juice all over Doris or something. So I didn't,
But
which
what
is
I
great.
remember most, I used to do the same thing. I used to read scripture, and I was so short that they would have a stool. They would pull out a stool for me so people could see me above the podium.
Mhm.
But what I remember most about that is afterwards, people would come up and encourage, you did such a good job. Just 2 or 3 people, they would encourage, and that just boosted everything about it, made it all worth it to me, even if I messed up, even if I didn't pronounce a word right. But, and I think that's important to remember, is how important our words and our encouragement can be, especially to young minds.
Yeah, I think it's important to look for those opportunities. And I think for the most part, that is exactly how a young person would be received at Newburgh. I think the key of it is, which we'll see throughout, this class, is that we need to do those things in relationship with teens. We need to, if we're going to expect them to, do things for us or with us, we need to be in relationship with them, walking them through it, giving them that encouragement. And sometimes we just don't do that very well. And
And
so
on the flip side, if you were to say something negative, like, well, I didn't really agree with what you said or something, that can devastate them and not ever, not want them to do anything ever again.
oh yeah. And again, why should we expect anything different? They're young. It's the first time they're doing something in front of 150 people. And if they hear any criticism, it's a lot easier just to be like, well, I'm not good at that, so I'm not going to do that again. And, it's unfortunate that sometimes, even again, people with the best of intentions will, you know, do things like that, maybe trying to correct or trying to, like, oh, here's a better way of doing it. So we just need to be more cognizant of that. So I want to get to kind of like the final piece here. I want to think about, what do we really want for our youth? Hi, Joel.
Hi, Joel.
Joel, hi.
What do we really want for our youth? And I want to think about it in two ways: our surface desires versus our deep hopes. So on the surface, whether we're willing to admit it or not, I think that most adults simply want our teens to become stable, moral church attenders who carry on the faith. So if we're thinking of it again in a church context, on the surface, most of us just day to day, we just want teens to become stable, moral church attenders who carry on the faith. In other words, we kind of just want teens to become copies of us. It's that roadmap thing. We just want them to become developed, form their identities, form this specific identity of a Church of Christ church goer who participates in worship, maybe gets married, those kind of things. We want them to form that identity. That's kind of on the surface. And so I want us to think again when it comes to youth ministry. Why does our youth ministry exist? Does our youth ministry exist? Hey, what's up, Joel? Okay. You say he's just watching?
Yeah, he came over because he wanted to show me his Lego Mario. I said, well, why don't you show everybody then?
Very cool. We need some show and tell time. I'll make sure that to build that into the next class. So why does our youth ministry exist? Does it truly exist to help teenagers develop spiritually, or does it exist to quell the fears and anxieties of adults? Because there is a difference. Remember those adult anxieties. What makes us anxious when it comes? How do teens make us anxious? So I think in a lot of ways, youth ministry came to exist because adults were like, wow, the world is changing. We don't know what to do with our teenagers. Let's stick them all into a corner, put a couple adults who are underqualified over them, and just hope and pray that they turn out to be functioning adults. Because we don't really want them involved. We don't want to hear what they have to say. We don't want them disrupting our thing. Let's just wait till their identities are formed and now they can be a part of what we do, So why does our youth ministry exist? Is it really for us, our own anxieties about teenagers? So our anxiety towards the future of our youth can cause us to prioritize things like good behavior, activity, regurgitation of doctrine, and how many teens are involved, or numbers, as markers of success. I'll say that again. So our anxiety about the future of our teenagers causes us to prioritize things like their good behavior, making sure they're active and out of trouble, making sure they can regurgitate our doctrine, and how many numbers, how many of them are there. Those are what, as our anxious selves, put forth as markers of success. When I think we can all recognize that that's not really what success looks like. So I want to ask 2 questions, kind of wrap things up, and then I'll give you homework. Why? So this might be again that difference between surface desires and deep hopes. The first one is, why do adults want teens to be involved in church? I want to hear your answers to that. Another way of thinking of it is, what's the goal of youth ministry? But I'd rather ask it as, why do adults want teens to be involved with church?
They're
Seems
the
like-
future of the church.
So that they can develop a lifelong relationship with God, with Jesus. And
I'm
that's,
taking my own notes.
What did Corey say?
Corey, you want to repeat yourself?
I said they're the future of the church. If we don't mentor and teach them right now, then the church could die off theoretically.
Corey, describe what you mean by the future of the church.
So someday when I'm dead and gone, then they're upcoming. They're the church. They're going to be the song leaders, the scripture readers, the pastors. And yeah, I mean, they're going to be sitting there in the pews. They will be the future church. Cool.
So I want to, because I believe this is a safe space, I want to challenge that a little bit. I do agree with you in the fact that like they will outlast us as a generation 100%. And so we need to make sure, that they're prepared, and we need to help develop them. But I want us to maybe rethink the idea of the future of the church. Not in how you described it, because again, I totally agree with that, but more in the idea of that they are presently a part of the church. Now, that they may not be Christians yet, however you define like what it means to be the church, but the reality is that they're among us, that they're already here. And so what I think a lot of adults operate in this idea again of like when you're an adult, and I'm not saying, Corey, at all that this is what you were saying, but I think sometimes when people say that, what they're saying is when you're an adult, then you can have an opinion, then you can have stakehold. And instead, what I would really challenge us to consider is how can we give them that right now? How can we make them feel like they are presently a part of our body right now, before they're an adult? Because if we wait until they're an adult, we will lose them. And I think that's the strength of youth ministry, is that we're trying, not always succeeding, but we are trying to do that before they reach adulthood. So again, like Corey, just to be clear, like I'm not saying that you're saying that at all. I just, I want us all to start thinking that way, that how can we make them feel like they are the church right now? That makes sense. Okay, other answers to why do adults want teens to be involved in church?
I would like them to develop a lifelong love and relationship with Jesus, and to get their questions answered, or us to admit when we don't know an answer, because sometimes we don't know. And I just think they should feel valued, not for attendance, but as people who hopefully will be seeking to know God.
Yeah, go ahead, Stan.
Thanks, the great response. But I was thinking also, I think what Kyle's trying to develop in the youth is not for the youth, as you were saying, Kyle, to have let's see, what was it? To have, you're trying to create in them their own faith in them, in Jesus, rather than your faith. I think that's a big part of your ministry. I was thinking, so when I'm not complaining here, Nilda, but you said have the answer, but I think sometimes, do you think, Nilda, too, there's more than one answer for everything? There's not a way. We're not, you weren't saying that, were you?
No, I guess what I mean is, I know Chuck and I know an adult who walked away from church because as a teen, he had some questions. He's very intelligent, and he had some hard questions, and he asked, the leaders in his church, and they just told him not to ask those kind of questions. They, like Kyle was talking about earlier. And I guess That's what I'm saying, is a safe place where they can question anything.
Exactly. Good one, Nilda.
Anything else? Why do adults want teens to be involved in church?
Well, maybe the last thing is, I think I've heard that said. I listened to this guy on the radio. He's saying, we're converting people so they don't go to hell. And I think Nilda hit it on the head. You're converting people so they can have a relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a perspective change.
Yeah. We put the fear of God in people
Mm-hmm.
rather than a love of God.
I have a thought, if you don't mind. I really had to think about that question, but one thing that came to my mind was maybe we want them to be involved in church.
Oh,
so
look
that,
at this. Look at this.
so that they can carry those, like what they see around them, how they see like other adults and other youth interacting with each other at church. They can carry that kind of behavior out into school and out into their relationships also.
Yeah, learning to be a light. Yeah. Well, you guys had good answers. And I think, again, if we were to pull, I mean, you guys are the shining stars, I would just say. But like, I think if we were to pull most adults, I think we would mostly get answers like we want kids to learn Christian morals. We want, we know that church is good for kids. Of course, we want them to know Christ, but the other reason we want kids to be involved in church is we want them to stay in church, and those are all good things, but I think they're surface desires. In his book, Mark talks about he went to speak at this church, and it was a parent thing, and he basically asked that some version of that question. And they, as parents, spouted off these things like, I want my kid to grow up to be a good kid, or, my parents took me to church when I was a kid, and those kind of things. And their youth group this was back when it was cool to name your youth group, which I guess it's kind of still cool, but I don't understand that. But their youth group name was Youth Power. And he was hearing them, give these answers, I want my kids to be in church so that they can learn to be good people and things like that. And he was saying, well, your youth name is Youth Power, and you should change it to what you really mean. And he was saying you should rename it Nice and Safe. And they kind of laughed because no teenager wants to be a part of a youth group called Nice and Safe. We want our kids to be nice, and we want our kids to be safe. But then he dug deeper, and that kind of brings me to this next question, and I'll give you just some time to think about it. I know I'm kind of springing it on you, but here's the question. What is your deepest desire or your deepest hope for youth to know? What is, if they could know one thing either about themselves or about Jesus, or what, if you could instill one truth in a young person, what would that be? What is your deepest hope for the youth that you know?
I would say that for the youth to know that they're going to be unconditionally loved by Jesus, no matter what mistakes they make.
I'm typing just so you know your guys' answers. Keep going.
Well, that was pretty much it for me.
Yeah. I just mean everyone, keep going. What is your deepest desire for youth to know?
On that same note, that we, the church, have that same regard, that there's nothing that they can do that's going to make us turn away from them. That my desire is to be a safe place for all of them, regardless.
Thanks for sharing, Corey.
What
That's what I
else?
was too, Corey, was I want the youth to know that they can come to us and share anything and we won't be a blabbermouth.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, Corey, isn't that what you were saying, Corey? That they can feel safe with us.
Yeah, and it has to do with being judged.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody goes forward and confesses something horrendous, that we should show love. You know, no judgment at all.
What else?
I want them to know that why, I want them to know on a personal, deep level why life with the Lord is better than life without him.
I think one thing that I want them to know is that they're part of a bigger picture. I think teenagers are very self-centered and focused on themselves, and it's hard for them to realize that there's a time past whatever they're dealing with right now. I mean, I think everybody has that problem, but teenagers especially have a hard time looking past now. That to understand that this, even though it seems like a big deal now, it's just part of their big picture, part of their big story, and that their story is part of God's story.
I like that.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, that's part of, again, we forget that their brains are still developing, and what's right in front of them is ride or die. Anyone else?
And
Oh, Jim, yeah?
yeah, knowing Jesus is the most important thing that they can ever learn, is to know our Lord.
Cool. I'm just going to stop us there just for time. We can bring this up next time. But I want you to see the difference between what you said in that second question that's just a better question than that first one. You know, if we ask, why do we want our teens involved with church? That's a surface level question. That's a bad question. But if we ask, what is our deepest desire? What is the deepest truth we want young people to know? We get things like that they are unconditionally loved by Jesus, and they are unconditionally loved by us. Now we have to prove that to them, by the way, that they can come to us and share anything without judgment or gossip, that they can feel safe with us. Again, we have to prove that to them. To know Jesus on a personal level, and why that's the most important thing. To know that they are part of a bigger picture, that they can overcome whatever is in front of them, and that they are part of God's story. Now, doesn't that just sound a lot better? Doesn't that sound like things that they want for themselves too? So how our goal now as adults is to figure out how we can actually do that. How can we instill that truth in them and for them to really grasp it as they're forming their own identities? So I'm going to wrap things up. Had a couple other things, but it's all good. We'll get to it. Here is your homework. So if you want to write this down, I'll try to email it out. But here's your homework. 2 things. Come prepared to share your answers. The first one is I want you to reflect on that question again. And if you have anything to add, what is one truth that you want our young people to fully grasp? If you have anything to add to that, or if maybe you didn't share this time. After a week of reflection, maybe you come up with something else. So that's your first one. The second one, and this one will be fun, I think, for a little while. How would you say your generation is different than what you perceive Generation Z to be? Because that's who we're talking about for the most part. By the way, Gen Z are born roughly between 1996 and 2010. In fact, Gen Z is like, they're starting to get out the door. We're almost to Gen Alpha, they're calling them now, the youngins. So the second question, how would you say your generation is different than what you perceive Gen Z to be? And don't be afraid to let them have it. Okay, I know that we've just had this, hopefully you've had this great spiritual breakthrough now. You're ready to go pour your heart out into teenagers, but remember that they're still whippersnappers and they've never used a rotary phone before. And I want you to really let them have it for that. So what is different between your generation? We've got a few generations represented here, not to say names or labels or age or anything like that, but that's good. So that's your homework for next time, is to think through what are those generation gaps. Next week, what we're going to look at is just who is Gen Z? Who are these darn teenagers that we're trying to get to know? And I'll share some stats from people who are way smarter than me and who have done research to tell us more about who teenagers are and how they think nowadays. Sound good? Cool. I'm
Thank
just
you,
gonna close.
Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you guys being here. I'm just gonna close us with a quick prayer and then we'll call it a night. God, I thank you so much just for the thoughts tonight and just the heart that I can see for our young people. Lord, I just pray that you'll use this this time of reflection with each other to be a catalyst for your spirit, to convict us, to call us to be there for young people, and to do the hard work of getting to know them, getting to know their names, and sharing our lives with them and their lives with us. Teach us how to receive young people, because when we do that, we are receiving you. Pray this all in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Kyle.
everyone. Have a good night.